blank. Are you doing Facebook Live today, producer? I can't. What? Did I take myself off mute?
Yeah, go. No, you're supposed to start talking. The
Oh,
show has
because the
started.
producer gave us a signs
Yeah,
up. All right. Well, it's Independence Day, Professor. Does it matter whether we call it Fourth of July or Independence Day or something else?
I don't have any deep thoughts on that. So,
I don't either. I prefer Independence Day though. So, is there a better holiday than Independence Day?
well, I've always felt like Thanksgiving is the companion to
Thanksgiving.
Independence Day.
Yeah, Easter's kind of nice too, and I like Christmas. But why is Thanksgiving a companion day?
Well, they're both national holidays, and in a lot of ways, uh, being thankful is the heart of patriotism, and
Oh,
uh,
God, I'm so glad I asked.
So, in a way, the we're Thanksgiving is when we, you know, are thankful for everything we have, and it's a national holiday. Everybody gets to participate in it, and then the 4th of July or Independence Day is when we're celebrating what made it possible for us to be so thankful.
Oh, gosh, that's completely lovely. I might type that up and put that in a Professor Tootle quote.
Oh wow!
If I was a meme creator, I'd create a meme.
I
But
I, I should
I
have
don't
thought
know.
it out better.
Well, no, it's pretty well thought out. So, Professor, I'm not sure where I want to take this show, so I want to just kind of do small talk for a minute or two.
Okay.
Uh, I does it surprise you from everything you know about me, and you don't know everything about me, you know a lot about me, but not everything about me. Does it surprise you that I just completely adore is the wrong word. I'm enchanted. I love this holiday. I just think I love this holiday. Does that
Yeah.
surprise you?
No, and I mean, I have the same feeling. There's no other holiday that um I mean, every holiday has a different sort of feeling is associated with it, but like the 4th of July is sort of exultant joy, you know.
Yeah,
There that's I don't think even sort of Christmas, it's a different sort of warm happiness,
I love
not the
that.
kind of just exultant joy, that you get at Independence Day.
So it's not a. Well, I mean, maybe it's an expensive holiday for you because you're on motorcycle travels. But I was chatting with our daughter. One of our daughters still lives with us, and I was saying, I'm going to do, roasted corn on the cob, and what else am I making today? Anyway, roasted corn on the cob and probably hamburgers. And she goes, "Man, I don't know. We could also do hot dogs." And I go, "Oh, hot dogs. Yeah, let's do hot." So I'm not even doing steak. I'm not doing anything fancy. Just grilling up some hot dogs and some corn, and we have some other item that sounds good too. But anyway, it's not necessarily the food, although I really actually do enjoy roasted grilled corn on the cob. So what is the reason why I'm so excited? It's because what?
Uh, because we declared our independence from Great Britain with a set of principles that made it possible for human beings to live in peace with one another.
Oh my gosh, I just love that. I'm gonna write that down again.
Oh,
These set of principles, though, I've critiqued you, not critiqued, I've queried you before. I'm not sure if you look at the document and you read it, and I've only read it half a dozen times in my life and skimmed it, or glanced at it thousands of times and skimmed it 50 times and read it probably 5 times. I'm not sure it's a cohesive set of principles. You say it is. I think it has one and then an implied and then a bunch of gripes and grievances. Will you just kind of outline that again, if you can, on why you
we
think
have to
it's a
do it
set of
from
principles?
memory here. You're asking. Um, well, first of all, I like celebrating Independence Day at either national parks or beaches because I think that in a lot of ways, the national parks and beaches really typify what our national experience and experiment is all about. There's nothing more small d democratic than a beach, and I love that about going to the beach because you could be a billionaire or you can be the poorest person on earth, and you get to enjoy playing in the waves exactly the same amount, and I love
Is that
just
not true everywhere else?
well, I just and the national parks are kind of the same. Have
Hold on, Professor. Sorry, you didn't answer my question. Is that
yeah,
not true everywhere else? Beach.
no, I mean, there's a difference in the kind of you have to pay for a lot of other things in life, and there will be a difference in quality depending on who can pay for what. But I love going places where rich and poor get to have exactly the same experience, you know.
But again, Professor, in Argentina or France or China or Japan, isn't it the same there?
I don't know. uh, I know that it doesn't evoke the same feelings. I mean, I'd have to think about where their national governments are now. You know, um, it would just become a complicated question to start applying
Well,
it to
well,
different
but
cultures.
but in America, beaches are free no matter what, even if a rich person owns the property right behind the beach.
Yeah, at least here in California, there's you don't get to own the beach. They you
And that likely is not true everywhere else in the world. Some rich person probably owns the beach,
I would
and they'll
imagine. Yeah.
yeah, okay. All right, sorry to be so detailed. Keep going with
No,
your
but
theme.
yeah, that's so. But when we get back to the declaration, there's so much in there that I appreciate. First, I love that it's when in the course of human events, and again, I'm going from memory, so I don't know if I can do this word for word. And so beginning by reminding everybody that this is going to be something that's going to be messed up. That because this is something that takes place in human events, it's going to be flawed by nature because human beings aren't gods. We're not talking about something that is perfection is an impossibility in human affairs. Um, and then it says, you know, you only contemplate this with big ideas over. You only contemplate this kind of separation over uh, big things that you've thought about for a long time, which I've always thought is a nice metaphor for how the humanities work, which is that uh, you know, science can uh, solve problems with an independent variable. Social science can um, say things about human beings and groups of people. Spiritual, you know, religious thinking is for questions that can never be answered. But there are some things about the human experience where we can get some big ideas right if we just study the past. And that's one, and one of those things is, you know, and trying to answer this question, can human beings govern themselves? You know, do it, and the answer, thankfully, is yes. But some people say, oh, you know, this is about if men are angels. But our founders, thankfully, said it's not about whether men are not angels, but they are good enough to govern themselves. They don't need an overlord. They don't need a national daddy. They don't need someone telling them how they should live their lives, and they can do so peacefully. And then, I
And
love
what you don't remember the specific language of that part?
Oh, when in the course of human events it
Yeah,
becomes necessary to dissolve the bonds, you know, that
yeah,
have held the two nations together. I can't remember the exact
yeah,
words, but
yeah.
then, but then I love that the first asserted principle is that is a statement of something we say on the show all the time, which is that what was founded was an ideological nation state. You know, that that there are a certain set of ideas that you're not allowed to doubt and still call yourself an American or call yourself patriotic and or call yourself a conservative for that matter. That that you have to hold as self-evident that that all men are created equal, and they are endowed with inalienable rights. And um, I also love that phrasing, even though people don't use that much anymore. But the word alien just means foreign, and I like the idea that your rights can never be foreign to yourself. You know, they are in you, which means that somebody can deprive you of practicing your rights, but they can never take them away because they're in you. You have them just because you're a human being. They're in your bones, you know. So, you know, I can tackle, you know, Jake and slap, uh, you know, gaffer tape over his mouth, and I would be depriving him of practicing his free speech rights, but he would still have them. they're still yours. Nothing a human being can do on earth can take your rights away from you. You still have them, and you're always entitled to them. Uh, and
We've never gone into that level of detail before on that because that sounds alien to me, actually, and nice. I really appreciate your articulating this.
Yeah, and that these things are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That if you want, so every time you see a rocket go up in the air and explode, you're celebrating the fact that human beings are entitled to live and pursue a life of their own choosing, um, in peace with other people, and we're going to try to set up a system to make it possible. And it's that commitment to a peaceful process that is also the source of so much frustration. But and it's a hard thing to teach people that it's a feature, not a bug, because at the moment of the declaration, we're committing ourselves to ending every form of aristocracy and special privilege. But we say, but we're going to have to do it peacefully, which means that we have to do it through a process of respecting the rights of people who would like to preserve forms of aristocracy and special privilege, which means it's going to be a lot slower to end slavery or grant women rights, or, and it's going to be a messy political process, but ultimately it will lead to, it's the only thing that has ever led to progress. And those things is the first having the commitment to peace and rule of law. Um, so, we and it doesn't mean that we don't still live in a world that's violent, that just because we're committed to a peaceful political process, that doesn't mean the entire world is, and it doesn't mean even everybody who lives here is committed to a peace. And so we still have to uh, be able to fight to defend these ideas, but at least it's a fight to maintain peace. um,
So,
Hopefully.
Professor, yeah, is it? I don't think the way you said it sounds controversial, but is it controversial that you said something to the effect that if, in order to be a true or patriotic American or conservative for that matter, you need to believe in peaceful resolution of conflict? Did you say something like that? Did I
Yeah,
summarize?
you're committing yourself to the idea that 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 other person who you're dealing with is entitled to life, that other person is entitled to liberty, and that other person is entitled to pursue happiness as they see fit. And but as soon as they enter into the world with you, that when you have a conflict with them, whether it's how many houses should we build in our city, or should we tax ourselves to build a water treatment plant, or um,
We go to
or
war.
yeah, or to go to war, that you're committed to protecting the rights of other people, which means uh, your your thankfulness, your gratitude, your celebration, your patriotism, your is all linked together with this idea that you have to protect the rights of other people.
Ah, that's completely lovely. All right, I adopt in its entirety your set of principles. I would take it more of as a small paragraph of a philosophical treatise rather than principles. So it's really interesting that you outline it, the Declaration of Independence, as a set of principles. So I will see if you eventually win me over on that. Um, Thank you. I love that.
Okay.
So
Well, I'm just stealing ideas from, Calvin Coolidge. So, uh,
okay, well, I think that's acceptable for a historian. Is that
okay.
not?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So, Professor, I originally wanted to have this whole conversation about the U.S. Supreme Court, and I think I sent it to you in a way that was, semi-provocative, a vigorous treatise in defense of a conservative Supreme Court, with a pleasant nod of appreciation towards the liberals, and I kind of mean that. But then I've determined I want this show to be a little bit broader than just the Supreme Court and the decisions laid out in the last term, or maybe the first term of this president's office and the new ones of this term, the 24-25 term. Here's the theme that I'd like to try. I love Independence Day, hooray! But I also love is too melodramatic for decisions of a Supreme Court. But I really appreciate this Supreme Court, and I mean the six conservatives and the three liberals. I and I know it's too simplistic to call them conservatives and liberals. In fact, that is actually my point. I think we're misunderstanding the role of the Supreme Court in our Constitution, enshrining the principles of the independence. And what I mean by that is not necessarily legal training, but I just think lawyers and judges, similar to how historians think about things differently than the average person, so do lawyers and judges. Yes, they have opinions. Yes, they're human. Yes, they have a set of philosophy. They probably vote. I mean, and they argue about all sorts of stuff. But there is in order to be a good judge, like a good citizen, you have to look at the set of facts in a different type of way as a lawyer and a judge. And if you reach the pinnacle of a height of success in our society, the U.S. Supreme Court justices, I truly don't think they think of, oh, I'm a Trumpian, whatever, or I hate Trump, or I think they look at the facts and the law and try to reach conclusions based off the facts and the law in a way that the average human being doesn't. I'm not saying they're omnipotent. I'm not saying they're so wise they're a god. I just think the role of the court is different, and most good judges think of themselves differently than an emotional human being just trying to reach the conclusion they want to reach personally. Does that resonate to you as a historian rather than a lawyer? And that we have three lawyers on the two other.
Yeah,
Well, maybe they can correct me in my analysis. Will you just give me some thought though on the role of the Supreme Court?
sure. I mean, the at first I was going to disagree with you, but then you saved it with what you said there at the end. So, do they think about the law differently than regular people? Absolutely, that's true. Um, and it's often a source of frustration to see how the Supreme Court is covered, and because media outlets are heavily incentivized to portray something about the Supreme Court that is just fundamentally wrong, and that because they know that what people care about are issues, but what the Supreme Court settles are questions, and because what people care about are political issues, the almost every news article tries to instead of describing what the Supreme Court did, they try to make it relevant and say, well, this is why you should be either high-fiving your friends or believing the world is coming to an end because of how it affects an issue that you care about, rather than fully explaining the what the Supreme Court actually did on any of these things, which is hopefully settle a legal question that was placed before them. So everybody thought, for instance, just last week, oh, this is about birthright citizenship. And well, it's not really about birthright citizenship. It's more about settling this legal question of how nationwide injunctions are could function. What are the limitations of the and this is really the question that ended up getting settled. What is the limitation of a a single district court over all of the courts and the application of law in the United States? That's and but I guess that's less sexy or something. Uh, so every news article about the Supreme Court was about that this is a win for Trump and that he's going to have dictatorial powers for the next few years. It's like, I don't think. First of all, that's not what the this decision said anyway. But second, that wasn't even on the table. Um, so yeah, it's a source of frustration. But
Well, so kind of over the overriding theme, is it okay? We are too self-described, although not. pleased with the current definitions, and but we're two self-described conservatives, correct?
Yeah, but I would just say, like, we're two self-described people who are committed to the idea of protecting the rights of everyone. How about that?
Love
'Cause
that. That's so much
the
better.
labels get in the way of people listening to us. So,
Yeah, well, that is entirely true. I had a nice argument about somebody on yesterday over that exact same point. So thanks for making that. So it shouldn't surprise those people or anyone else, though, that you and I are both fairly pleased with this, or even very pleased with this court. It is probably the number one accomplishment of the Trump administration, both terms.
yes, and not just that, but um, because you do have two people on the court who maybe are more, let's say, issues oriented, who uh, who kind of represent an extreme view, and I certainly wouldn't want five Ketanji Brown Jacksons or five Samuel Alitos. But it's okay to have one Samuel Alito and one Ketanji Brown Jackson, at least asking the questions. It's kind of
And
why
both very smart people, by the way. You're not insulting their intelligence. You're just thinking they're
no, I mean, it's the
ideological.
same. No, it's the same way I always feel about libertarians. I say, I always want one libertarian in the room because because they should be forcing us to make a better argument. Uh, so I always want one person in there with a really strong set of beliefs to challenge my fundamental assumptions, and uh, that's usually a some hardcore wackadoo libertarian. So
Yeah.
I always want one one of those in the room arguing with me, you know.
So you're thinking Ketanji Brown Jackson and Samuel Alito both add value to the court, although they have an ideological bent. But the other seven, you think are just extraordinary justices and are good for America.
Well, I mean, I think that each one of them are represent um, a, an entirely different form of jurisprudence. They're all individuals, and they all have. I mean, and the same is true for Alito and Ketanji Brown Jackson too. They all have an entirely different philosophy of jurisprudence, and it is just pretty amazing to watch them work through problems and agree and disagree with one another. And I am often amazed at how good the work product is. I don't, and some of them are just, um, you know, I mean, they are really smart people. uh,
Mhm.
yeah, we are very lucky on the average quality of. I would say that this might be here's my bold historical statement. This is probably the best Supreme Court in American history.
And I've made that statement as well, and gotten ripped into my by my liberal friends. Why do you think? Well, why do you say that? And then I'll tell you why I say that.
Well, I think it's because the court is uniformly of high quality in terms of intellect and character, and also, um, uh, if you take the most extreme views of the two most extreme court members, they're still somewhere on the recognizable, uh, or acceptable, political, um, within framework. There's no pro-slavery justice on the Supreme Court right now. There, that's kind of a big deal in my book. There's no one on the Supreme Court who would argue that men and women aren't entitled to political equality. There's nobody on the Supreme Court that would argue. I mean, if you think about like trans rights, gay rights, minorities, anybody there that no matter how sort of um, historically oppressed a group of people are, that there isn't anybody on the court um, who doesn't respect the dignity of an individual. That, I mean, that in and of itself is a pretty remarkable accomplishment considering the courts of the past.
So you're talking about the composition of the court. What about the court at large, though, in their decision making? Why you would say that they're the best U.S. Supreme Court as a whole in the United States history?
Well, I
I'll be
just
curious
think
if you like
well,
my
I
answer.
mean, I was just saying, like, if you were to take the overall quality of all of them, that would be how I would rank it. But also, um, I don't know if Chief Justice Roberts is the best Chief Justice of in
Right.
American history, but I mean, he might be. Uh, I because when I start running through other Chief Justices, I can't think of any who are better off the top of my head. And he's done a remarkably good job um, of keeping the court together and moving forward and handling this era where so much pressure is on them as the last, you know, maybe fully functioning branch of government. Um,
Professor, but they also didn't look this up before the show because I was sleeping. But I think Pew came out and said that the Supreme Court has one of the lowest approval ratings by U.S. population in a long time, if not history. We don't like the Supreme Court, like nor do we like Congress, nor the executive. We don't like anybody anymore. But is that true? Do we care about popular opinion, or we
well,
should care?
popular opinion is just wrong. I mean, that's
Or
not a
should we even care?
yes, because it represents a fail. I mean, but in a way, like it's just registering the it's it's registering the social failure that has led to the non-functioning of Congress and the presidency. You know, the lack of understanding of what our government is and what it's supposed to, well, I shouldn't say is, what our government is supposed to be and what the role of government should be in our lives and what it could be and what our representatives are supposed to do.
So you have the hubris to say that that poll, if accurate, that they think the U.S. Supreme Court is not good, is a better reflection on the citizenship of the American people than it is on the court. It's
Yes.
it's it's just it, it's an ignorant statement.
Yes.
Yeah. Boy, you're not getting likes from the American population from this conversation, Professor. Let me tell you
Well,
why I like this court, and see if you agree with it. And then I want to get Jeff, particularly Jeff and Bart, to jump in since they're lawyers, and then maybe Tony because he's probably upset with me. Okay, so here's why I like the court. I think they truly, as a whole, look to see what the Constitution says, to see whether the act of Congress is constitutional or the act of the president is constitutional. Then I think they truly look to see what the statute, what the law is, what Congress created as a body of law, and see whether those facts fit into first the Constitution, then statutes, and interpret those cases to see if there's a rightful outcome that are do justice to the Constitution and statutes. If they don't like it, I don't know if they care. It's up for Congress to write a different law, or it's up for the people to elect a different president to faithfully execute the law. I just think that simplicity, it's a very complex simplicity, but the simplicity of it's not their job to make law or create better justice in society. Their version of justice is make the people and their elected representatives make the people argue about this stuff until we somehow can live with peace in it. And I think that's what's needed in order to have a peaceful, fair, just society. I think I, as an individual citizen of the United States, and you have an obligation to fairly argue about this. And sometimes it's really ugly and unpleasant, and sometimes we get mad at each other. But the bottom line is we need to create the laws and the culture. We shouldn't be dependent on an oligarchy, five people in the Supreme Court overruling four people, then go, we have peace and liberty in America because they made a decision. I just think that's an unfair request as a body politic to put on a Supreme Court or anyone else, a president. We shouldn't. We, your words, we don't want a daddy, whether it's an individual in the executive or whether it's nine people making a decision in the Supreme Court. That's why I think this is a really good court. And I think we're in a really good place in America because we're forced to be better citizens over time. It will take some time, but I think we're forced to confront really hard issues. Can you give me a reaction to that? Then we'll see what the lawyers say.
Well, I was actually thinking one of the things is like, if the republic survives and we, depending
Wait,
on,
what? You just throw that. What do you mean? Did you just say if?
uh, well, yeah, I mean, right now we're desperately in need of a renewal of uh, civic education and um, and we've got two of our three branches of government not functioning very well. So I don't want to act like it's a foregone conclusion. Every generation of Americans has to keep this going. So I don't know what the people of the future are going to do.
Okay,
But
I love that part, but you're still scared me on the first part, so we're going to go back to that. Keep going.
okay. But I was thinking that one of the one of the potential stories in the future, if we recover and handle our national challenges, is that people might look back and really appreciate the jurisprudence of or just what Antonin Scalia did to reorient the court and thus the national debate over how laws function. And then, in a way, his legacy in how it was, and in some ways, maybe I shouldn't say legacy. The conversation that took place between Scalia and Thomas, that the ongoing legal conversation that took place between those two guys, and Thomas obviously still on the court, but just reorient, and in most of it when he first got on the court, Scalia was doing it in dissent.
Mhm.
He was the lone voice out there arguing for what is sometimes called text history and tradition, or I don't want to, he didn't use that phrase, but just the idea that you look first to the text, and he often described himself as a textualist, not an originalist, but that what you do is you look at the text and then you say, okay, well, what did these words mean at the time? What did they mean in the law? What did they mean in history? And but ultimately, what you must do is defer to um, the words and the law, and that you can't simply overrule a law because you don't like it. And then the justices that have come along since then have have all risen through the ranks at a time when you had to either argue for or against Scalia. and and thus they all have the imprint, even the people who don't. And so I would say in between Alito and Ketanji Brown Jackson, really, you have people who have all really wrestled with Scalia in a serious way, and um, and are, even when they come to vastly different conclusions, Elena Kagan might come to a different conclusion than Clarence Thomas, but they still run it through the test of what does the law say. They still go through that step, which is really remarkable given how bad the Supreme Court had gotten and how bad the legal system had gotten for the previous sort of 100 years.
So
So
you're basically concurring with my philosophy of why it's so important. First, you look to the Constitution, then you look to the statutes, and the outcome is important based on the facts of what the law says. But it's not your decision as a judge to determine that whether it's a great law or a bad law. That's not their job. That's Congress's or the president's execution of Congress's will, right? I mean, that's not their job.
yeah, in other words, and um, it, they are to varying degrees um, saying that it's putting the pressure and the onus back on the other branches of government, saying we're not going to fix your. In a way, the Supreme Court had been enabling the president and the Congress
And the
by
people.
Yeah,
and the
and the people by just fixing their problems. But I I think that we've sort of turned this corner where the Supreme Court has said, okay, we're not going to fix this anymore because we've been fixing it for so long that you've all forgotten how to do your jobs. You've been sort of taking advantage of the fact that we were going to come back and fix things for you, and now you've uh forgot we've been driving you everywhere and now you've forgotten how to drive. um
so that makes me optimistic. Not tiny fearful, but a little tiny fearful. It makes me optimistic. I think this is a great opportunity for citizenship to thrive in America, to get better representatives. To get people to get elected to work hard on solving these issues on behalf of the American people. Is it happening? I'm not so certain that's true. And do I have some nervousness about it? Uh huh. But it seems to me like historians will look back at this day and see that there's a potential that hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands or millions of Americans rose up and said, this is the kind of nation we want. And they and that's that what a great opportunity. I think this is a great time to be an American. I am really happy on this 4th of July. Do you agree with those two premises?
it's a great time to be an American. It's I'm happy on the 4th of July. But I guess I don't make I don't know where we're going because
As a
you know
country,
well I just what's that old expression, experience isn't I know I'm messing this up, but it's like something along the lines of experience isn't the best teacher, it's the only teacher. Man will have no other. And in other words, in order for people to actually learn, they have to fail. And I don't like going through the failing part. That's always painful. You know,
aren't you contradicting yourself though in the Declaration? That's what it's designed for, is for this ever ongoing struggle for liberty and peace. It's
But
a
that's
con-
something that has to be taught. You have to be taught to want to protect the rights of other people. And if you're not taught to do that, then what you will do is you'll revert back to what human beings always want, which is um, give me what I want right now. Our
and a
government
power
is,
by force if needed.
yeah, and who cares how you accomplish it? And most of the political arguments I hear are almost never about principle. It's just, I want this, give it to me. And there's more of us, and so therefore we should win, you know. And when we win, we're going to, shove it down your throat and make you like it. And when the other side wins, we're going to shove it down your throat and make you like it. And the goal is just to win the next election so that you can be in charge of the executive orders. But if you think about it, like the Supreme Court was saying, okay, we're not going to fix these problems anymore. And then it was like, okay, well, the administrative state is going to step in and fix these problems. Well, except for now, the administrative state got, out of control. They said, well, Congress is going to fix these problems. Except no, 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 that's not going to work. And then it was like, well, uh, let's let the president do it through executive orders, and then whoever becomes president is just going to, issue executive orders right and left, and then be out of office by the time and then the administrative state's going to make it possible for us to, essentially fight this for the duration of the presidential term so that, you know, uh, Biden gets to delay student loans for the 4 years that he's in office, and maybe Trump will just not enact the TikTok law for the 4 years that he's in office, and and then the law is just going to change every 4 years. Uh, but that's not at all how our system is supposed to function. But um, something big has to happen before people will simply with that to shake the majority of the American people into um, rethinking and reasserting the founding beliefs. Um, it's it, it would take something like, well, for instance, if Trump had let the bond market collapse and the American financial system collapsed, that might have done it.
I'm gonna hold on, Professor. I'm gonna pin you down, and you're
Debt
not gonna like this.
crisis and
Just a month or two ago, and you'll have a nuance, I think, that will unwind the pin. But I'm gonna try to pin you down. You said a month or two ago, and I'll have to pull the tape. If we were a better produced show, Tony, I'm kidding. If I had more time, I would actually roll the tape and say, react to your own words, Professor. You said we will know we're in trouble and we need to do something different when American soldiers are on American streets enforcing the law. Do you remember saying that?
yeah.
Well, we have American soldiers on American streets enforcing the law, and now we have 10 times the amount of budget in order to do more. And the big budget bill that just passed yesterday, 10 times. It's going to be the largest police agency in American history, overriding every other agency. So we're going to have a lot more American soldiers, and the DoD defense budget has increased too. We're going to have a lot more soldiers for a lot more time enforcing the law. Should we be concerned, Professor?
Um, Maybe. I don't know yet because the Border Patrol was sort of chronically underfunded, and maybe this was the size that it needed to always be. And I mean, I'm just giving you what could be a best case scenario,
Sure.
and maybe having a Border Patrol funded to this level will allow for the kind of prioritization that the American people want rather than these sort of mass roundups haphazardly thrown together in order to meet weird quotas. Um,
So you're thinking increasing the size of ICE by tenfold is going to create a better situation by targeting the criminals, not executing mass deportation.
well, I just think about like when we've seen, I don't know. There's a sort of principle that Eisenhower always said, which is, if that hill is heavily defended, I can take it with a platoon with heavy casualties, or if you give me a division, I can take that hill without firing a shot. You know, which is that sometimes um, going in with a massive show of force actually leads to a more peaceful resolution because people think I'm not going to challenge this. And we saw this in policing a lot. Like as you move further west, we cities tend to be policed more lightly and in cars, and it was a kind of flawed um, philosophy that came out of the Los Angeles experience that we don't need to have as many policemen but our police are going to be super cops who can do everything, but if you don't have a large enough police force, it actually in some cases can tempt criminals. you know uh I I'm not saying it's going to happen that way. I'm just saying that I'm not as confident as many predictions that it has to end up being terrible. I think it's
Really bad.
well,
Let's hope.
I mean, I kind of think it's a waste of money too. I mean, we're so in debt, I just don't see
So I,
expanding this to the I mean, there are so many other areas. I mean, everybody would argue, if we all came up with a pie chart of how the government should spend its money, everybody would come up with a different pie chart. But, um, I, I- you know, uh,
yeah, and I lean way
I
more
just
on
don't
the
have a lot of confidence in. Let me summarize it this way. I don't know, but I also know that everybody else expressing an opinion, they don't know either.
yeah.
Uh,
Agreed. I have much more uncomfort and unease with this. I think we're going to be seeing some really bad stuff here in coming months.
But I
And
also, here's an example of something I was talking about with one of my friends the other day at coffee is what if a politician was to offer up the solution that the border exclusion zone needs to be cut from 150 miles down to 75 miles. And that politician activists would all chime in and say, that's not good enough. you know and I think about that. It's that the politician who is offering to make the situation better is the first person to get attacked and destroyed. And that's the problem with our politics,
That's
which
an
is that
interesting.
if a Republican was saying, it's kind of actually absurd that they claim 150-mile um, of territory where they get to do whatever they want, you know, which means they can operate where the vast majority of Americans live and in places where there is no border crisis, um, and that's too much of an assault on our liberties. And so let's just cut it in half. Let's cut it from 150 miles down to 75 miles. And as almost as soon as it came out of my mouth, um, my friends all acknowledged, like, yes, that is the person who would get destroyed politically, the person who's offering to make the situation better. That's a problem.
Yeah.
The person, because the one side would say, what are you doing? You're weakening our borders. And the other person would say, that's not good enough, and you're on their side, and that's kind of the problem with our politics.
Okay, that's insightful too. I have three things I hope we have time to get back to, but I really want to interrupt our conversation with whatever Jeff, Bart, and Tony would like to jump in on. Tony, you have to leave soon, so I'm going to give you the first bite at the apple.
Excellente. Perfecto. Hey, I agree with you both.
You're going to lose your liberal card. You don't agree with us.
I agree with you 100% of the time. So what I do want to say is, Stephen, Professor Tootle, I love what you're talking about as it relates to immigration. And you're right. I would be the guy that would carry that water and get destroyed. I'd be like, hey, well, we're going to make it 75. And I'd be like, hey, no, I'm your ally. And they're still destroying me. And which frightens me a bit that after the conversation we had last week, I'm like, why am I not more, why am I not running for a school board or a city council or something like that? Which I think Brackney has tricked me into, that kind
Yeah.
of thinking. I think the whole time it's like some kind of horrible cult. This place is Tootle Talk cult, you know. But I'm going to be, the reason I need to go is because I'm going to it's exactly what we were talking about. It's called Warm Cookies of the Revolution. And we're going to be doing it at a park.
Wait, do I have to disassociate myself with that? That sounds so liberal. That sounds communist, Tony.
It may be commie, it may be social. I haven't been before, but they've been in existence, for about 5 years. And when you look at the community people that have come together, and it's not about a protest, it's about educating ourselves civically and eating some freaking cookies, dude. John. I know you like cookies.
I
There's
love
no
it.
question, no question. So anyway, so I really appreciated this because I think we're in a tough spot. You're right. There's two kind of branches of the beautiful triad of our government that are problematic, and I know some people will jump me for saying I agree with a lot of what you said about the Supreme Court. These are people that are this is the only thing I'm going to ask, and I'll ask so that I don't keep talking, and that's this. So, what does character have to do with your capacity to give a good decision? And so I want it's a little bit of a loaded question, but not too much. But how does character impact a judge or a Supreme Court justice's capacity to deliver unbiased or whatever, well thought out opinions? That's the only question I really have.
Good, Professor.
I think that it's an excellent question, and I actually have two friends who have become judges, and it is interesting that in both cases they are two of the highest character people. In other words, if you had asked me 10 years ago which two of your friends would you like to see become judges, it would be these two guys. Um, and in that sense, even in California, the system sometimes works, although they had to change their political affiliation in order to get appointed. But uh, but what it does is it orients your values so that you care about um, doing something that is eternally right, and it allows you to um, sometimes en do something that's unpopular because it's the right thing to do, and also um, resist the temptation of popularity. I think that's maybe the most important thing, because we all want to be liked, but I'm sitting here grading final exams right before the show, and I know what the students want. Everybody wants an A, and even better would be I want an A for doing no work, and I could be the most popular professor if I would give people what they want. But what's actually good for them is is for me to hold them to some sort of a standard. And the same is true of a judge. You have to have the character to say, I'm not going to give you what you want. I'm going to give you what's best for you and what's best for society. And then you also have to have a, the character to actually do that, instead of uh, give in to your own weaknesses, whatever your own weakness happens to be. Everybody's got their own, what the movie The Three Amigos called, your own El Guapo. But for some people, shyness is their El Guapo, is the line from the movie. But everybody has their own particular weakness, and character is what allows you um, to at least hopefully address that weakness, address your own El Guapo.
All right, Tony, I love your little emoji things coming up. I hope that makes the recording.
Yeah, that's what I'm here as the producer to show you all what tools you have. You all can use those tools. So that's what I'm here to do. So thank you, Professor Tootle. John, I agree with you. This is my favorite holiday. I just love it. Not for the fireworks because I have dogs, but just
Yep.
because it's all about contemplating our independence. What does it mean? What does that really mean? What was really happening in 1776? So I also agree with you. And I may stay on because I'm getting picked up. It looks like I just got a message. It'll be a little later. So my chauffeur, so.
Gotcha. When you disband, that will be fine. So just leave when you need to. Jeff, you are one of our two resident lawyers. So I'd rather you have more of a legal kind of question than political or historical or sociological. But you can do whatever you want. What would you like to ask the professor or argue with me? Whatever you'd like to do. Time is yours.
Boy, there was so much in what you guys said that I was furiously writing notes and everything, but I think probably the entry point will be the last thing the professor said about the virtue of a judge. And I'll come back to the judges. Um, I don't agree with you guys that this is the best court, largely because there are too many originalists. Most of the people are from the Federalist Society now, and so they all look at the Constitution in a particular way, and I don't think that's good for
Jeff, should that be the
jurisprudence.
only way? What do you mean? I would argue that all nine should be a textualists. What's wrong with
Well,
just
there,
look?
so textualism and originalism are two different things. Textualism, actually, Stephen Breyer said he was a textualist. So there are a number of tools that a justice or a judge is supposed to use in determining the constitutionality of something, or how the legislators' intent was put into paper and how that should be applied. They should all be using all of those tools to try to figure things out rather than only one. And so that leads to, I'm in complete agreement with you guys that the court has become less willing to do somebody else's job. I think that's right. And I was very unpopular in my house of three daughters and a wife when Dobbs came out, because I was like, well, in the philosophy of our system, that was correctly decided because it's a political question and it ought not to be the court making that decision. It ought to be the legislature. The problem I have, and coming back to Professor Tootle's, virtuous judge, is that what I expect is virtuous representatives. I expect the Congress to be thinking about what's best for the country first, and their citizens, their constituents second. My sense of the Congress now and in much of the past is that they are thinking about what's best for them, which is, how do I get reelected? And it could be that that's a surrogate for, well, then I'm doing what they want. But I mean, I think right now we're trading what we want most for what we want in the moment. We're giving up all of the protections of rights in the name of whatever is the popular thing right now, which is, an anti-immigration movement. So I don't know that I have a question. Those were my thoughts.
Well, Professor Tootle, react to his thoughts, and then I have a follow-up question for you, Jeff.
Oh, I think he's right. I guess if we would almost have to go justice by justice if we were. I don't know that I would call anybody on the court. I mean, this is dancing on the head of a pin here, but I don't know that I would consider any of them to be pure originalists. I think they all have a different jurisprudence. Kavanaugh is very different from Gorsuch, and
Well, Professor, I don't know if we have to
anyway, but that's but I'd rather dwell on what he said that I agree with, and I think he's identified a real problem in our representation, which is that there is a disconnect between even doing what your constituents want, doing what's best for the country, are somehow not connected with that third thing, which is getting myself reelected, because you can get yourself reelected by pretending in a specific way to share the same feelings as a group of people who happen to live in your district, which I think is very different from doing what your constituents want, or doing what's best for your constituents, or doing what's best for the United States. And I think that's a really almost elegant way of describing what the problem is with our elected representatives right now. I agree wholeheartedly with that part.
And the one other thing I was going to say is that has existed for quite a while. And so the court has been backstopping, and it's great. I read Comey Barrett's holding in the decision that came out last Friday. And that was exactly what she said. She said, Congress has not given us this right. And so the court can't fix problems with Congress by being beyond our rights ourselves. She said it a lot more eloquently, obviously.
Yeah.
But we're not fixing Congress. And so you may be right, Professor. We may need something really big to break.
But we have a social problem, which is the social problem is that voters won't vote for the person who's promising to make things better.
Yeah, it's right.
Just like, it's such a bizarre thing to say out loud, but I think it's true. Like, voters do not want the person and will not vote for the person who's promising to make things better.
Other than for them.
Well, I don't even know if it's actually doing what's best for them.
But it's what they want, not what's best for them.
I don't even know. It's something even dumber than desire. I think it's more like a perceived. I want somebody to share my perceived feeling, not even a logical desire, because this was always the argument that conservatives made against liberals back in the day. Just go back 40 years, and I remember saying, well, of course we're always going to lose this election. They're promising to give more money. But now you don't even have to promise to give more money. You just have to pretend You just have to share the same feeling. In a way, I'm nostalgic for people voting for just to give themselves more money. That would at least, it makes more sense than just voting for the person who pretends to share my feelings. Anyway,
Jeff, do you agree with that? I would say that there's a ton of people that, as long as they're making the other side look bad, or they have the shared grievance, or they're taking their anger out on another team, that's good enough. That as long as they're fighting the fight for their cause, they're happy. Even if they don't get anything, at least they're smiting thy enemy.
Yeah, owning the libs. Yeah, no, politics has become a contact sport, and that doesn't serve any of us.
Okay, going back to the Supreme Court, to you both, and Jay and Bart, feel free to jump in. Oh God, I'm totally ignoring Jake. Huh.
we got to get Jake and Bart in here. Let's let
All
Bart
right.
talk, because I want to
My
hear what
question, Bart and Jake, jump in.
Okay, here. I'll jump in since I'll follow my legal colleague from another state, which is great. I largely agreed with what everybody was saying about the Supreme Court. I agree with Jeff also that it's hard to kind of peg a Supreme Court and say this was the best Supreme Court we've ever had, because I don't know. I mean, we've had Supreme Courts going back 250 years now. Good or bad, whatever, they are who they are. They're all brilliant. I will say that they're brilliant. They produce wonderful decisions. Very well written. Chief Justice Roberts is really pretty amazing the way he can kind of get consensus together. What's going to be interesting to me now is really the next Supreme Court term. And to be honest with you, I think this Supreme Court term is going to bleed over into the next one, because with the decision last week, I think the one Jeff was referring to was the CASA decision, the national injunction or universal injunction decision. The court didn't really settle that issue. I think everybody thinks they have, because Justice Barrett said, well, we don't have the authority to do this except when, and of course she couched it, well, now what's going to happen is the courts are going to come back with all the except when they needed to do it.
Yep.
And at some point now, the court is going to have to decide that. And after Justice Kavanaugh's interesting concurring opinion, where he basically said, well, I don't mind this emergency docket, or whatever we want to call it, equitable docket, whatever they're doing now. He said, I don't care about this. Just bring these cases to us and let's make these big decisions. Well, this is going to be very interesting now, because they're actually going to have to make decisions on things that they kind of were able to avoid this year. So let's see what happens. I don't know.
Isn't that the role of a good court, though, Bart, to delay having to make the decision until they absolutely have to? Let the other branches do their work.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that, John. I think that, I think they were in a position.
Why are you disagreeing?
No, I'm agreeing.
I know you are, but Jeff is at an angry no shake at me.
Okay.
Come on, Jeff, why are Bart and I wrong?
It goes back to the court was holding up a system where the other branch wasn't doing its job. So yes, the court ducked the question and said the lower courts need to figure this out and bring it back to us. And if Kavanaugh's right and Roberts is willing to have an emergency docket that just nothing else gets done, and all it is Trump administration appeals on things, if he's willing for the court to do that, yeah, that probably would be better for all of us, because things would happen faster and decisions would be made faster. But I don't think a court does a good job when they and I mean, we've all read the cases where the court obviously ducked something that needed to be answered because it found a loophole where it could duck it and send it back down. In the case of birthright citizenship, they weren't asked the question, they shouldn't have answered it. But the fact that they're not answering it creates 2 years of crisis for quite a few people.
Why do you think it will be 2 years, Jeff, instead of 2 months?
Because it has to go through, what they said is the lower courts need to work this out. So you're going to have to go back to the district court, then you'll go to a circuit court of appeals, and then it'll come to the Supreme Court where they'll decide, I hope, to grant cert. That could take 2 years.
Could take 2 years, but is it also not possible that, and I don't know if this is a good example, probably not, but Kansas City and Kansas and City, Missouri, after this temporary stay of a couple more weeks, can't there be a U.S. citizen born in one state and just a mile away, a non-citizen be born? And that will be so untenable and so rapid, so many class action suits that it will bump it right back up to the Supreme Court and not take 2 years.
How do you bump it back up to the Supreme Court? The administration can ask for emergency docket. I don't think regular people or even maybe states can. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Bart,
Bart, help me out on this. If there's two,
Yeah, the emergency, the emergency docket comes from basically death penalty cases. So individuals can go to the Supreme Court and ask for pretty quick stuff. But Jeff is right. In an ordinary course, it is going to take a while for all of this to percolate back up again.
So you guys
but
honestly
let me just say that the political system could step in.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nice.
Like what the court is also saying is, Congress, you could pass a law, or
That's right.
We're not going to work out your chaos for you. We'll let it evolve through the common law, as common law often does. But if you want this to evolve through the courts, through common law, you're not going to get your emergency win right now. So it's like giving the political system, the political branches, another chance to do their jobs as well.
So, gentlemen, you all believe that after this temporary stay is over, and I think another 3 weeks, that they say there's 10 million, could be 20 million, but say there's 10 million illegal immigrants in the United States. And I don't know how many of those folks are childbearing, but there's going to be lots of them. There's going to be tens of thousands of births in the next year in the United States from illegal immigrants. And you're saying that in half the states, I'm not sure what the exact number is, but in half the states, those are going to be non-citizens. And in other half the states, Colorado is one of 22 that has a class, I believe, that they'll be U.S. citizens. You're going to say that this is half and half. That mess is going to affect tens of thousands of real babies. Is that what you're saying? And that it's not going to go somehow get back up to the Supreme Court more than years from now? Is that what you're saying, Jeff and Bart? Yeah?
Yeah, and I think I disagree with Jeff a little bit. I think it could happen faster, just given the facts in this that are going on the ground. Because the lawyers are pretty crafty who are involved in these cases.
Yeah.
And I think they're going to find a way to go back up pretty quickly.
I think I did see that the ACLU has filed a class action.
Right.
Like the day that the decision came out. So they were ready. And
yes,
I'm certainly hopeful it moves that fast.
And I'm thinking that's going to pierce that decision of the court. And they just punted for a couple months because that will be so untenable to have tens of thousands of non-citizens versus tens of thousands of citizens based on an arbitrary state line for birthright. It's in the Constitution. This is really simple stuff in a way. It's not deep, complex legal stuff. It's right there in the Constitution. Am I not right, Professor?
Yep.
Okay. So have I convinced you, Jeff? No.
Well, Justice Barrett put into her decision 2 things that suggest to me what I've always believed. It's 98% certain how the court's going to decide. And so she sort of said, bring it back to us and you're going to lose. But I'm not convinced that the administration ever really cared about this. They wanted to defeat the universal injunction, and that they accomplished.
Yeah, actually, that's true too. Yeah, God, it's nice to have smart people on here. Jake, now's your time to jump in. We still have lots of time in the show left, 15 minutes. Now's your time to jump in and critique or criticize or question.
John, I'm not a lawyer, unlike, 3 of you. Well,
I'm not a lawyer either, Jeff. All right, Jake, I'm with you.
I know, that's why I say that you are half a lawyer.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, really, it kind of goes back to what has just been said. I think a lot of the recent Supreme Court cases, it comes down to like if people really wanted to fix this, Congress could pass a law. So, I mean, laws can be challenged too, but laws are a lot more concrete. So, I think what has been said, we have one functioning branch of government right now. Also, we are all probably going to die in like 14 minutes because that is when probably Trump is going to sign the one big beautiful bill into law. And according to everything that I've seen on social media, we are going to die after this becomes law. So it's been nice knowing you guys. We have 14 minutes left to live. I
Yeah.
just, I mean, John, you talk about Facebook a lot, which I commend you for. I'm spending a lot less time on social media because I'm on summer vacation. You know, best thing about being a teacher, June, July, and August. But for, I feel like your Facebook feed is more boomer Gen X tilted. My
That's correct.
Facebook, my Facebook feed is I'm a younger millennial. And so pretty much everyone my age that I went to high school with is saying that like we all kind of grew up in the Trump era for politics. We were too young to vote when Obama was president. So we kind of came of age with Trump. And we're seeing the consequences of that. I have friends that think that Trump is the worst thing ever. And it's interesting, Gallup just did a poll that they came out with, and the question was, are you proud to be an American? And if you look at the trends of the poll, so right now Republicans are at 92%, and Republicans have been the highest. The poll goes back to like 2001. In 2001, Republicans were at like 90 and Democrats were at like 87. So they were pretty even. It was most of the country for both of them. But if you look at the poll, when Republicans are president, Democratic patriotism goes down a lot. And right now it's saying that Democrats, it's 36% of Americans, 36% of Democrats say that they're proud to be an American. Republicans are still holding steady at like 92. And so I try to explain this to people I went to high school with, and then they block me. And I tell them like your patriotism for the country shouldn't be determined on who's in the White House. So there's this one girl I went to high school with. I guess we're like 30 now. Um, she posted this like Substack link that was saying like why millennials and Gen Z aren't dating. And then she's like, the reason why I'm not dating is because I'm too focused on politics, even though like being single sucks. I really wish I was married, but I'm too focused on politics. And I really wanted to message her so that she could block me and be like, I think that you can still date because your form of political activism is she attended the No Kings protest and then she posts on her Insta story. And it's like, I think you have time to date and post on Instagram. And I think a reason why she's probably still single is because she's letting politics kind of take over her life. She's also kind of stopped attending church. So she has ditched God and replaced God with, democratic politics.
Boy, there's a whole show in this one.
Well,
Yeah.
and you got to remember, I live in Utah and most of the state is LDS. So if you say that you're not into religion, I'm sorry, that's
Yeah.
not going to go well for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Professor, reaction to
I
Jake's.
would just plug, the best and most thought-provoking thing I encountered last week was that podcast Conversations with Coleman, where he was interviewing Arthur Brooks, that touched on so many of these issues. And I think I might have shared it with you guys, but it really is extraordinarily good. But part of that he touched on was because it was a podcast about happiness, but dating, relationships, and just fascinating stuff. But you're right, probably subject for another day.
It's a great subject, though, Jake. And by the way, I think there's a more of a unifying thread to the different generations than you think. All my liberal friends, I mean, 95% of my liberal friends are really pissed and really scared and really adamant and really thinking that the court and the situation in America is dire. I mean, go ahead, Jake.
John, I'm not saying there's not unifying threads, but most of my, like pretty much everyone in your generation is already married, and some of you
Yeah.
have grandkids already. My generation, like I've been married for less than 3 years. So
Right.
a lot of us have been married. I mean, no one in my generation, no one who I went to high school with has been married for over 10 years yet. And so it's either we're married or we're still single. And a lot of the people that are still single, I have several examples of people saying that politics have taken over their life and they devote so much time to it by
Right.
scrolling on Instagram. And they say that that is political activism.
Yeah.
And I tell my students this all the time that if your political activism is scrolling and reposting stuff on Instagram, you are lazy, and don't be mad when the cause that you were stumping for on Instagram fails. Like if all you're doing is reposting stories on Instagram and then the initiative that you're in favor of fails because you weren't an activist, you're just lazy.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
hard, Professor.
Well, it is true. It's quite a frustration. I mean, I've always said like, um, well, I'm at the coast. I have a nice memory of something that happened to me when I was in college. So at the time when I was young and unmarried, and my best friend and I were at a pizza place. I think it was down in like Arroyo Grande or Shell Beach, somewhere down a little bit south of here. And we were in line for pizza, and there were two college students who were arguing and uh and one of the guys was kind of a blowhard, and he turned to my best friend because he could tell obviously everyone in line could hear their debate, right? And the guy turns to my best friend and says, I mean, what about this guy, don't you agree? And my best friend said, did you guys vote in the last election? And and they all said no, and they said, well, I did, so whatever you think doesn't matter. And it's one thing to have feelings or like or share things on social media, but like I used to say, show that you care by attending one central committee meeting for your political party. you know Show that you care by voting for and look at how much your social media, or look at how much you use your phone for one day, and then volunteer 1/10 of that time to being somewhere in person, in like with a political party, and
Or
yeah, working for a campaign, because I know that the average is something like 6 hours a day. So if you think, if you really believe in this cause, you should be able to devote 5 hours a week to it. you know
Yeah.
uh
Well, Professor,
and
let me take us back, though. We only have 5 minutes left. Um, if any one of my liberal friends were to listen to any part of this show, I think they would be, I don't, disgusted actually, or thinking we are so off the deep end that we're not even living in the real world. They think we'd be in a conservative bubble, thinking the
John,
U.S.
if any of your liberal friends are going to listen to this podcast or any other sensible political podcast, it means they're probably not off the deep end and they're more like moderate-minded liberals.
right,
I
Ah,
right.
would love it if liberals listen to this podcast, not to
Yeah,
convince them to be a conservative, but it means that they're not crazy.
okay, I agree with that caveat. You should be a lawyer, Jake. That's a nice distinction.
yeah.
Um, so, my point still stands, Professor. If they were to listen to any, if not the podcast, but if I take a cut quote or two about the Supreme Court, the vehemence and animosity against the author of the cut quote or the Supreme Court being rational or good or any, it would just be so, they would not have any comprehension how that could be true. So I'm giving you a last bite at the apple, semi last bite. We'll see if anyone else wants to jump in. Just to try to articulate why it's important to have a court like this, and for the good of society, for the good of their liberal causes. It's a good idea to have this kind of court. Can you give us anything that might be able to pierce that?
Well, the answer for what's the true answer to that question versus what's an answer that would appeal to them? Do you want the real answer, or do you want the answer
Both.
that appeals to
Let's
them?
do both.
I mean, the real answer is you should care about preserving peace because you would be the first person to die once peace goes away. Like the minute that the internet goes out, you're gonna be the first person to die. Uh, uh, so uh,
Expound on that slightly more. I think I've got your.
but they wouldn't want to hear that. Let me think of a nice way of saying that. Uh, I um
Never stumped you before. This is interesting.
well, I'm trying to remember. There's a quote that immediately came to mind. I might have to have Jake.
Notate this: 121 shows, and we've never had the professor pause this long.
There's a line about. I'm just trying to remember who said it, but liberty to all is what clears the path for all. It gives
That's
hope.
Lincoln's fragment on the Constitution.
Yeah. I mean, that's maybe the best answer for why. Um, uh, um, Pull up Lincoln's fragment on Constitution and Union, aka the Apple of Gold document. That's maybe the best way of saying why you should want a society that follows laws and rules. I mean, the answer is because it's what gives hope, industry, and enterprise to all. It's what clears the path to all. That something is the principle of liberty. Yeah, of liberty to all, the principle that clears the path for all, that gives hope to all, and by consequence, enterprise and industry to all. And there's another good Lincoln quote that is it's also in a Theodore Roosevelt speech where he says, let not him who is houseless pull down a house, but rather let him endeavor to build one for himself so that both shall be free from violence when built. You know, one of the reasons why you should want a Supreme Court that is trying to follow laws equally applied to, yeah, let not him who is houseless pull down the house of another, but let him work diligently and build one for himself, thus by example assuring that his own shall be safe from violence when built. If what you really want for yourself is a good life, this is what you have to advocate for, because it is that principle, liberty to all, as applied, but hopefully by the Supreme Court, and through our founding ideals, that makes it possible for us to have enterprise. And as I describe it to my students, like you're willing to work for what you want in life. You're willing to be creative in order to solve problems to get what you want in life. And uh, in order to have that, you have to want the rules equally applied. Sometimes I'll use the metaphor of a basketball game. If you say we're going to play basketball, but one side gets pickaxes and shotguns, and the side that uses the pickaxes or the shotguns in the basketball game, they haven't actually won a game of basketball because they weren't playing basketball. They were using pickaxes and hatchets to, chop up other people. That's not basketball. But if what you want to do is win at the game of basketball, you have to want a referee, and you have to want that referee to call fouls against you when you commit a foul, and call fouls against the other person when they commit a foul, because that way that when the game's over, you actually won at something that was actually a game of basketball. And uh, that's what rule of law is, and that's what it gives us. And so that's why we should maybe be a little more, we should slow our roll a little bit in our condemnation of a Supreme Court that's trying to apply uh, textualism and rule of law to legal questions.
It's semi-accurate to say that's a constitutional republic versus a pure mob rule democracy.
Yeah, a mob rule democracy that descends into chaos and violence. Yeah,
Or anarchy.
yeah.
So we don't have time to say how patriotic we are, and I know you sometimes think that's overrated.
Well, no,
Um,
I don't think. In fact, let me recite uh, the Tom Brasino patriotism test. It's every now and then I want to remind everybody of my friend Tom, who many years ago, this was back in the 2000s when we were first seeing
Professor
that people hated
War
America. Yeah, he's a professor at the Army War College. And back in the 2000s, when we began to see this split in people, not being proud to be Americans or not, being patriotic, um, Professor Brasino said, if you want to know if somebody is patriotic, ask them. And if it takes them more than 10 seconds to answer, the answer is no. like, like, so every single patriotic American, if you go up to them and say, like, are you patriotic? They'll just say yes, But if they start launching into this really long, just, then, Tom would just say, oh, all right, I got it. And the answer is no. You're going to take 5 minutes to explain why the answer is no. But
And Professor, I agree with that, and you've seen me do that with people that have come on our show. I agree instinctually. I agree with that, but you also articulate properly understood, or it shouldn't just be this blind waving a flag patriotism.
well, I don't ask if people are nationalists. Are you blindly committed to the the blood, soil, and um, symbols of a place? Um, but but an American patriot should mean that you are someone who loves the idea of liberty to all. And
True.
shame
I
more
think
people don't know that, but uh,
we're going to end the show on that. That's a nice way to summarize Independence Day or the 4th of July and our 249th year of our history. We're going to talk more in the future shows about if our republic survives. Forget I mentioned that. I want to end on a positive note. But we're going to talk more about the other two branches in future weeks. Professor, I hope you enjoy your travels. Gentlemen, I think we didn't have any women today. I really got to fix that. Jeff, I've really got to fix that. Anyway, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Happy 4th of July. Let's celebrate our Declaration and our Constitution today while we make a better place for us all. Great.
right on. See y'all.
Thank you.
All right.
It's all.
Enjoy the
Bye,
day.
everybody. Happy 4th.
Yep.